04:17 a.m. North Atlantic. The ocean was still. The USS Gerald R. Ford moved through freezing waves, engines steady and calm. Then came the first sound, a faint sonar ping. Within seconds, two more. 3 contacts appeared on radar screens. Silent, cold, and closing in. The crew realized they were surrounded. 3 Russian submarines forming a triangle around the U.S. carrier. No one spoke. The sea held its breath. In the next 7 minutes, one wrong move could start a global war. Stay till the end, because what happened next changed U.S. naval strategy forever. Like, subscribe, and turn on the bell. This is a story the world was never meant to hear. It began as a normal patrol in early May 2025. The North Atlantic was calm, but the tension under its surface was not. After months of silent standoffs between NATO and Russia, every movement at sea carried risk. The United States Navy had deployed the USS Gerald R. Ford Carrier Strike Group for what was officially called routine maritime security operations. Unofficially, it was a show of power. The strike group was one of America's most advanced fleets. At its heart stood the USS Gerald R. Ford, the world's largest and most modern aircraft carrier. Surrounding it were guided missile destroyers like the USS Thomas Hudner and USS Roosevelt, a cruiser, and a fast attack submarine operating deep below. In total, over 6,000 sailors formed this moving fortress on the sea. Across the northern horizon, Russian forces had been running their own operations. Intelligence reports showed unusual submarine activity out of Severomorsk, home to Russia's northern fleet. NATO satellites tracked 3 nuclear-powered submarines leaving port without official notice. Analysts suspected they were Yasin-class attack submarines, stealthy, powerful, and deadly quiet. These subs were built for one purpose: to hunt carriers. The Yasin class had a low acoustic signature, almost impossible to detect by standard sonar. Each carried cruise missiles that could strike ships or land targets from hundreds of miles away. Their crews were among Russia's elite, trained to operate unseen for weeks beneath polar ice. When those 3 submarines vanished from satellite coverage, alarms quietly went off in multiple NATO command centers. Meanwhile, the U.S. Strike Group was conducting flight drills roughly 200 miles east of Iceland. Commander Sarah Mitchell, a tactical operations officer aboard the USS Thomas Hudner, was overseeing sonar sweeps and communications. Her job was to identify and track any submarine threats in the area. She knew that Arctic waters were tricky. Sound waves bent through layers of warm and cold water, often creating sonar blind spots. For days, the sonar readings had been clean. Nothing unusual. But late that night, faint echoes started to appear on the ship's underwater sensors, brief signals that didn't match any known civilian vessel. The pings were irregular but persistent. At first, they were dismissed as ocean noise or reflections from the seabed. Then the contacts began to move, slowly and in coordination. Mitchell's instincts told her this was no accident. She reported the anomaly to the fleet commander. Orders came to increase passive sonar monitoring and maintain radio silence. Active sonar, the ping that reveals a ship's position, was considered a last resort. The carrier strike group switched to a defensive posture without announcing it publicly. By dawn, 3 distinct signatures were confirmed, each moving at different depths, surrounding the formation. The Russian submarines had positioned themselves like hunters closing in on prey. The Ford group maintained formation, continuing drills as if nothing had changed. But below deck, everyone knew they were being watched. The situation was tense but not unprecedented. Both nations had shadowed each other before. During the Cold War, U.S. and Soviet subs played this same dangerous game across the Atlantic. But this time, the stakes were higher. With advanced missiles, cyber-linked systems, and electronic warfare capabilities, one misread signal could trigger an escalation in seconds. In Washington, the Pentagon tracked every move through encrypted satellite feeds. The National Security Council received live updates, but no order for engagement came. The priority was de-escalation, to avoid public confrontation. Still, the command allowed the strike group to prepare for counter-submarine defense. That was coded language for be ready to fight if fired upon. The sailors on board had no idea how close they were to crisis. Most thought they were simply conducting drills. Only the senior officers and sonar teams knew 3 nuclear submarines were stalking them from the deep. Hours passed, and the ocean remained silent. The tension became part of the air, thick and heavy, felt but unseen. Commander Mitchell later described the feeling as being watched by ghosts. Every blip on the radar made hearts race. Every sonar echo drew whispers. Yet orders remained the same. Maintain formation, stay silent, and don't provoke. But silence can't last forever. The ocean has its own rhythm, and that morning, it broke. At 04:17 a.m., everything changed. The sonar screens flashed, alarms sounded, and the battle that no one wanted suddenly began. 04:17 a.m. The USS Gerald R. Ford was moving through cold Atlantic waters at 20 knots when the first alarm sounded. The sonar officer on the USS Thomas Hudner shouted a single word that froze the control room. Contact. Within seconds, 2 more echoes appeared on the sonar display. 3 confirmed contacts, all closing in fast. Commander Sarah Mitchell leaned over the console. The readings were clear. These were no random underwater noises. The contacts moved with purpose. Their formation was deliberate, 1 to the north, 1 to the east, and 1 trailing behind. Together they formed a silent triangle around the U.S. carrier strike group. At 04:19 a.m., the fleet commander aboard the Ford ordered the group to Condition 2, high alert. Lights dimmed across the ships. Radio silence was maintained. The ocean outside remained still, but beneath it, a deadly chase was unfolding. On board the USS Roosevelt, the sonar team activated the towed array system, a long cable of sensors trailing miles behind the ship. Its purpose: detect sound signatures hidden in deep water. The data came back within seconds. The acoustic fingerprint matched that of a Russian Yasen-class submarine, the pride of Moscow's fleet. At 04:21 a.m., the second contact was confirmed. Another Yasen-class, operating 40 nautical miles away, moving at 15 knots. The third was deeper, over 1,000 feet below the surface, and harder to lock. Together, they were tightening their circle. The carrier's defense systems switched to standby. Anti-submarine helicopters, MH-60R Seahawks, were prepped on deck. Their pilots sat ready, waiting for the green light to launch. But no one wanted to be the first to act. One wrong signal could turn a standoff into war. Inside the command center, tension built with every sonar ping. Commander Mitchell watched as the lead Russian sub changed course. It was now heading directly toward the USS Thomas Hudner. Its movement was aggressive, a clear provocation. At 04:24 a.m., a sudden burst echoed through the sonar feed, a torpedo launch signature. The room went silent. No one spoke for 3 seconds. Then the alarms blared. The fleet went to Condition 1, combat ready. The Ford's escort ships activated countermeasures instantly. The USS Hudner released ANSLQ-25 Nixie decoys, underwater systems designed to mimic ship sounds and lure torpedoes away. The Roosevelt deployed acoustic jammers, flooding the sea with noise to confuse enemy sonar. The carrier turned sharply, shifting course by 20 degrees, a rare maneuver for such a massive vessel. Meanwhile, one of the MH-60R Seahawks launched into the night sky, carrying sonar buoys and lightweight torpedoes. Its mission: find the threat before the torpedo hit. From above, the helicopter began dropping buoys, creating a sonar net across the sea. Within seconds, one of the buoys picked up the sound of the torpedo, then silence. It had detonated prematurely, likely fooled by the decoy. At 04:28 a.m., another explosion rocked the ocean, deeper, heavier. The shockwave rattled the sensors but caused no damage to U.S. vessels. It was unclear who fired first. Some believed it was a malfunction from a Russian submarine. Others thought it was a warning shot, a show of strength. The fleet maintained its defensive stance. No U.S. ship fired back. The carrier group continued to move as a unit, holding formation and discipline. Communication lines remained tight. Every sailor knew one mistake could ignite global chaos. By 04:32 a.m., the sonar screens showed the Russian subs pulling back. 2 contacts moved north. The third dove deeper, disappearing into a thermal layer, a pocket of cold water that hides sonar signals. At 04:35 a.m., the threat was officially downgraded. The Ford's commander ordered all ships to maintain silent tracking and avoid pursuit. The encounter was over in less than 20 minutes, but it left a mark that would last for years. In total, no vessels were hit. No lives lost, but the message was clear. Russia's subs had successfully surrounded America's most powerful carrier without detection until the very last moment. The sea fell quiet again, but no one on those decks would ever forget that silence. It wasn't peace. It was a warning. The kind of warning that only comes from the deep. To understand how this encounter unfolded, we need to break down the machines, systems, and tactics that turned a quiet sea into a battlefield of sensors and silence. The Russian submarines involved were believed to be Yasen class, known in NATO as Severodvinsk class. These are nuclear-powered attack submarines, among the most advanced in the world. They are about 390 feet long and can dive deeper than 1,600 feet. What makes them deadly isn't just their size, but their stealth. Built with titanium and sound-absorbing materials, a Yasen-class sub can run so quietly that older U.S. sonar systems often can't detect it until it's less than 20 miles away. Each Yasen class carries a deadly loadout. It can launch Caliber and Onyx cruise missiles, capable of striking ships or land targets from distances over 2,500 miles. It also carries 32 torpedoes, silent killers that can travel at 50 knots underwater. These subs are equipped with advanced sensors that can detect even the faint magnetic fields of other vessels. To put it simply, they are designed to hunt without being hunted. The U.S. Navy, on the other hand, relies on layered defense, a combination of surface ships, aircraft, and underwater surveillance systems. The USS Gerald R. Ford was protected by several Arleigh Burke-class destroyers, including the USS Thomas Hudner and USS Roosevelt. The towed array sonar is one of the most powerful tools in anti-submarine warfare. It's a long line of hydrophones trailing behind the ship, listening for the faintest underwater sounds. Because it sits far from the ship's own noise, it can detect quiet submarines that would otherwise go unnoticed. Above the water, the fleet had eyes in the sky, MH-60R Seahawk helicopters and P-8A Poseidon patrol aircraft. These aircraft carry sonar buoys, magnetic anomaly detectors, and torpedoes. The MH-60R can deploy passive and active sonar buoys that create a sound grid over a large area. If a submarine moves through it, the sensors pick up the vibration and relay its location back to the ship. In this incident, that combination of systems made the difference between a close call and a disaster. When the Russian torpedo was launched, the U.S. ships used AN/SLQ-25 Nixie decoys. These small underwater devices emit sounds that imitate the signature of large ships. The torpedo, which tracks sound, locks onto the decoy instead, saving the real vessel from being hit. At the same time, the U.S. used acoustic jamming, flooding the water with noise to confuse the submarine sensors. This tactic disrupts communication and targeting systems inside enemy subs. In modern naval warfare, silence is power, but controlled noise can be just as lethal. Environmental factors also played a major role. The North Atlantic AS cold water creates thermal layers, boundaries between warm and cold water that bend sound waves. Submarines hide under these layers because sonar signals can't pass through them easily. That's why the third Russian sub disappeared so suddenly. It dove beneath one of these layers, breaking the sonar lock. Speed and range also determine who dominates underwater. The Yasen class can reach up to 31 knots submerged. The American Virginia-class attack subs, often assigned as escorts, move slightly slower but have superior detection range. U.S. destroyers can coordinate with these subs using encrypted underwater communication, a system known as C3I, Command, Control, Communications, and Intelligence. Experts later analyzed the sonar data from that night. They estimated that the Russian submarines approached within 30 nautical miles of the U.S. carrier before being detected. Dangerously close. Normally, such subs would be tracked at over 100 miles. This meant the Yasen class had successfully bypassed multiple layers of NATO surveillance. For the U.S. Navy, it was a wake-up call. The incident proved that modern submarine warfare had entered a new phase, one where stealth technology, digital noise reduction, and data speed mattered more than raw firepower. Every beep of sonar, every whisper on the radar was a signal in a chess game played in total darkness. And that night, both sides realized the same truth. Whoever controls the silence beneath the waves controls the future of naval power. By sunrise, the crisis was technically over, but its consequences had just begun. The official U.S. Navy report labeled the event as a subsurface anomaly. There were no confirmed hits, no casualties, and no open confrontation. Yet everyone involved knew what had really happened. 3 Russian submarines had managed to surround America, AS most powerful carrier strike group, and vanish without a trace after a brief but tense standoff. Within hours, the Pentagon received a full debrief from the Gerald R. Ford's command staff. The sonar data, encrypted communication logs, and aircraft telemetry were transmitted for analysis. The results confirmed what many feared. The Russian Yasen-class subs had used advanced quieting technology to slip through NATO's detection grid. It was the closest underwater encounter between the U.S. and Russia in nearly 2 decades. In Moscow, the Russian Ministry of Defense released a short statement denying any aggressive action. They claimed their submarines were conducting routine exercises in international waters. But behind the scenes, satellite images from NATO's Maritime Command showed a different story. One Russian submarine had surfaced west of Murmansk 2 days later, escorted by support vessels, with visible signs of damage along its hull. The incident triggered a surge of quiet diplomatic messages between Washington and Moscow. Both sides accused each other of provocation, but neither wanted escalation. Instead, they turned to silence, the kind used to hide tension rather than ease it. The U.S. avoided public mention of the event, while intelligence agencies worked overtime to analyze how the Yasen class had slipped through sonar coverage undetected for so long. Inside the Navy, the mood was sober. The encounter exposed vulnerabilities that could not be ignored. Training schedules were immediately revised. Anti-submarine warfare drills in the Atlantic doubled. The U.S. Navy increased coordination with NATO allies in Norway and the U.K. to strengthen acoustic monitoring along the Greenland-Iceland-UK gap, a choke point long known as the Gate to the Atlantic. Strategic analysts later called it the near collision of ghosts. They argued that while no weapons struck, the standoff carried the same weight as an open battle. It proved how easily technology could blur the line between deterrence and disaster. One miscalculated move, one confused sonar return, and nuclear powers might have found themselves in a conflict that no one could control. Within weeks, the incident faded from headlines. It became just another rumor in defense circles, discussed only in secure briefings and simulation studies. But to those who were there, it was more than a drill. The faces of the crew, the red glow of the control rooms, the sound of alarms at 04:17 a.m., those memories didn't fade. No one declared victory. There were no speeches, no medals. Just a silent understanding. The balance of power at sea had shifted. The Russian submarines had sent their message, and the U.S. had heard it loud and clear. The Cold War might be history, but its shadow still moved beneath the waves. Long after the encounter ended, the North Atlantic returned to silence. The waves rolled as if nothing had happened. But beneath that calm surface, the memory of what occurred still lingered, unseen but not forgotten. The ocean had once again proven its truth. Wars today don't need to be fought to be won. They only need to be shown possible. For the sailors aboard the USS Gerald R. Ford, those 20 minutes changed how they saw the sea. They had faced an invisible enemy, one that could strike from nowhere and vanish without trace. In that silence, they felt both fear and respect. Fear of how close the world came to a new conflict, and respect for the precision and discipline that kept it from happening. Commander Sarah Mitchell would later write in her report, "We didn't fight a battle. We survived a test." Her words carried a weight beyond the ship. They reflected a new kind of warfare, where the contest is not about missiles fired, but about who blinks first, who breaks silence, who gives away position. Modern conflict is no longer about distance or territory. It's about control, of data, of detection, of information. The side that hears first, moves first, and decides faster, holds the power. The Russian subs had shown that stealth can challenge even the mightiest fleet. The U.S. response showed that calm readiness is just as powerful as firepower. Defense analysts later called it a war of shadows. The encounter reminded the world that deterrence isn't loud anymore. It's quiet, digital, and invisible, measured in milliseconds and sonar echoes rather than missiles and explosions. Months later, the sailors went back to training. The ships returned to their patrols. But something had changed. Every sonar ping now carried meaning. Every unknown contact drew a longer pause. They had learned the cost of underestimating the silence. And somewhere, deep in the cold waters of the Arctic, the Yasen-class submarines sailed again, unseen, unheard, waiting for the next move in a game that never truly ends. The ocean keeps its secrets, but those who serve upon it know one truth. Peace is only as deep as the silence that protects it.